Hi everyone, it's your friend Doris Thecoder back with your video, first video of 2022. So today's video is a coding shout out. If you are new to my channel, welcome. A coding shout out is when I give you, as coders, consultants, auditors, whatever aspect of the administrative healthcare arena that you fall into, resources that you can find helpful. I realize that every coder or auditor or person on the healthcare administration side does not have direct connection or access to physicians. So there's really a huge gap in information that you might not be able to obtain. You don't have the ability to dialogue. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to dialogue with physicians and being able to have a physician that I could reach out to and say, what does this mean? Help me break this down. What does that term mean? Because often what will take me hours in research, a physician can knock out for me in 5 minutes, just by simplifying, because it's their craft and they understand. So a coding shout out is going to relay you to different resources, often on YouTube, but not always on YouTube, that help you kind of fill in the gap. Now, I have been known as, and maybe I'll embrace it, an anatomy pusher. Someone's like, God, you're like an anatomy pusher. That there's some truth in that, because what I realize is that the medical records that we deal with are not in a layperson's language. They are in the language of terminology. So if you don't understand, you may see the coding term in the book. For example, if I took electrophysiology, I could see pacing. And what does pacing mean? If I don't know all the terms that are descriptive of pacing, things like entrainment and extra stimulus and burst, if I don't acknowledge those terms as synonymous with pacing, I'll never understand when I'm seeing those terms in the record that the physician is pacing. I would look for them to say the word pacing. So I think it helps kind of bridge the gap between what I call the clinical speak versus code speak gap. The codes say this, but we say it this way, and that means that. So the site here that I'm going to refer you to is Lecturio Medical. I've actually reviewed several videos on this site. I find them very informative. They're not very long and drawn out, very easily comprehensible, even though it really is. I think their audience is maybe medical students or those sitting for the United States Medical Licensing Examination, the USMLE. Not certain if I got that term right. Um, I just assume that's what it is with the content. So it's for physicians, but it is not very over your head where you feel like, oh my gosh, this is too much. Now, you may actually have some of the terms that you're like, that's way over my head. I don't know what they're talking about. But it's okay. You can still glean something from it as a coder. So I like to go to playlists. Again, they're Lecturio Medical, just Lecturio on YouTube. I like to go to the playlist. If you are in anesthesia, so I'll take one of the ones that I looked at. If you're in anesthesia, new to anesthesia, been in anesthesia for a while, coder in anesthesia, but no access to physicians, you will find the anesthesia playlist immensely helpful. They talk about some of the agents that we see in the records, such as sevoflurane and desoflurane, succinylcholine. What are those? Propofol, Versed or midazolam, what they do, how they affect the heart. So how do we connect it all? We connect it because when we're trying to, for example, understand what anesthesia time is, now they don't cover time because that's really a reimbursement element of anesthesia, but it helps you understand why the severity or the intensity of services change once we start to push these agents. When I train my coders, I often tell them about, the propofol effect, and it's quite interesting. Like, many of us kind of never heard of propofol until Michael Jackson died from being administered propofol and not properly. We kind of saw the effect of what propofol is. So being able to understand what those agents are, what they do, kind of helps us connect to the reimbursement aspect. some of the tubes we see, the different ways to intubate. When we're looking at a pre-op evaluation and we see malum pati, well, what is that? And that's the one airing here. So I find it immensely helpful. If you're in anesthesia, it's great. It is not limited to anesthesia. This is one of those resources that can be used across the board, across multiple specialties, and immensely helpful if you don't have the benefit of a dialogue with a provider. Some coders don't. Like, we work in an industry where it's not an impossibility. Actually, it's quite practical for us to work remotely or work from home. So you don't have the benefit of being able to dialogue with a physician. So this is really helpful. If you are in pain management, you may find this helpful as well, because they talk about neuraxial blocks, and the other limb blocks in intravenous regional anesthesia was immensely helpful. What does the block do? How do they approach it? What are the risks of it? How can that help me from a pain management perspective? Let's say I code E&M and my provider is doing one of these blocks. When I'm trying to assess level of risk, which they said we don't have to do in 2022, but I don't know how true that is. I think we'll need to still support our providers. If you don't know the risk of that block versus another block, it's very different. Like, did you know that for some of the approaches to the blocks, they have a risk of collapsing the lungs or paralyzing you from eyebrow to the bottom of your feet, right? Depending on the block and the location of it and how they access it. So those are all things that help us connect the coding aspect to the clinical aspect, or the reimbursement aspect to the clinical aspect. And the physicians will continue to work in a layperson's language. So when you can understand the language they speak, you can have a more meaning dialogue with your physician. This is not us playing physicians. We don't have to. Those seats are appropriately filled by the physicians. But being able to understand the language that they speak and being able to translate that language into the coding system and identify gaps when necessary is critical. So definitely, if you're in anesthesia, check out Lecturio's anesthesia playlist. You'll find it very helpful. Again, it's not limited to that. If you code neurology, emergency medicine, cardiology, neurology is not one of my specialties, but the other ones are. Again, immensely helpful. So check out Lecturio Medical. Until the next video, I am Doris Thecoder, and you know what I say, like it if you do. I found the information and I'm sharing it. If you know someone who could benefit from the resources, feel free to pay it forward and share this information with them. Give me a comment. Let me know what you want to know about and what you think of the video. So this is the first video of 2022. And until the next one, I'll see you then. I'm Doris Thecoder signing out.